Welcome to Know This Live. I'm Zinhle Essamuah. Joining me today is Georgia Representative Nikema Williams. Last month, she became the first Black woman to represent Georgia's 5th Congressional District, a seat held by the late John Lewis for more than 30 years. Representative Williams also chairs the Democratic Party in her state. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you for having me, Zinhle.
Of course, and just jumping right in, I know you were sworn in last month. What are your priorities as a new member of Congress?
So I was sworn in just last month, and what I'm realizing is that we just hit the ground running. And so initially, I have been very consistent. I have a 5-year-old son who you may or may not hear at some point during this interview. But I have a 5-year-old son who's been doing learning from home and virtual kindergarten. And so we got to get this pandemic under control and a national response. And so we can get our children back to school in person safely, get our economy back on track, and also make sure that we're getting people the care that they need, getting vaccinations distributed equitably throughout this country. But the pandemic continues to reveal so many other inequities in our country. We saw what happened during the electoral season here in Georgia and across the country with absentee ballots while people were trying to vote in the midst of a global pandemic. And so I've noticed that the pandemic has just impacted so many different things and have revealed so many critical needs in our country, like our care infrastructure, our voting rights legislation that needs to be updated to meet the times. And so I am looking forward to getting to work on those things. We've already hit the ground running. I'm on the House Financial Services Committee as well as transportation and infrastructure. And we've already passed a budget reconciliation measure out of committee to move forward in the Biden American Recovery Plan. And so we're doing the work of the American people, and I'm eager and ready to do more.
And I know there's been no shortage of events and crises to address, including impeachment. And we saw this week the NAACP filed a lawsuit against former President Trump for the Capitol insurrection that happened in January, saying it violated the Ku Klux Klan Act. And other Democratic lawmakers are expected to join in. Will you be signing on?
So you are very timely with your question. We just had a briefing from Derek Johnson, the national president of the NAACP, and my colleague, Congressman Benny Thompson, during our last Congressional Black Caucus call and going over the specifics and the timeline. And so I'm definitely following up with Derek. We've worked together on many issues, and I want to make sure that we're holding people accountable because that is something that the United States Senate did not do. I did my part as a member of Congress. I voted to impeach Donald Trump for the insurrection that he incited and caused in this country. And if what we saw on January 6th was not enough reason to impeach a president, then nothing is. And so we need to move forward in holding our elected officials accountable in this country. And it does not stop because you're at the end of your term. You still must be held accountable. And so I am having further conversations with the NAACP about how I can be supportive in their efforts.
And you referenced that call with the NAACP, I believe, with other members of the Congressional Black Caucus. Should we be expecting more lawsuits coming forward, whether from the NAACP or your fellow lawmakers?
Well, I think that we're looking at something collective and how can we support the NAACP and Congressman Benny Thompson and what they're already doing, and other members will be given the opportunity to sign on as plaintiffs in this current lawsuit.
Got it. Thank you for clarifying that. And I know that the district attorney in Fulton County, which is your home state, opened a criminal investigation looking into whether laws were broken by President Trump, or excuse me, when President Trump asked the governor to find more votes. And this is referring, of course, to the 2020 election. If it is criminal, what should happen?
So, in my opinion, it is not a question of if it is criminal, but if we have enough to convict him of the criminal acts that he's already done. So, but I will leave that up to my DA. And when you commit a crime, there are consequences. And the United States Senate used their political issues within their own party because we saw that it was the Republican Party that Donald Trump still very much controls who refused to convict him of the crimes that he committed. But that does not preclude other people who are not beholden to Donald Trump from holding him accountable in criminal and civil courts across the country. And so I know that I have an able prosecutor here in my DA, Fani Willis, and I'm looking forward to what is coming down the road. Georgia continues to save our democracy.
And of course, Georgia continues to make headlines. I know the Georgia GOP released a report calling for voting limits to be enacted after the party lost both the presidency and 2 senator seats. The aim for that being to justify the voting system overhaul that they've been calling for. Of course, this isn't fully agreed upon between Republicans. It is dividing them. You are the leader of the Democratic Party in your state. All of that said, how are you going to make sure voters are not continually disenfranchised in Georgia?
So we have activists on the ground who are continuing to elevate their voice. But what I know is that there are some things that should be standardized across the board. And it should not matter if you live in Georgia or if you live in Washington state. Your right to vote should be safe, fair, and secure in this country. And that is why I am continuing to move forward with my work on HR 1 and HR 4 in the United States Congress, because some of these things should be done on the federal level so that it is standardized across the board in our protections of your right to vote. What the Georgia General Assembly is doing right now, led by Republicans in our state, is appalling. We saw large numbers of Black and brown voters show up to vote in the November election and the January election, voicing their concerns and making the will of the voters heard should be first and foremost. We even have Republicans who have said, well, the elections were fair, the elections were secure, and there was no evidence of fraud in our elections. But then in the same mouth, Zinhle, they're saying, but yet we need to make it more difficult for these Black and brown people to show up to vote. It's appalling. It should not happen. It is 2021, and I am still sitting here in the seat held by John Lewis, fighting to protect our right to vote.
And I'm glad that you referenced that this is not just specific to Georgia, but a national issue. I know that the Brennan Center identified at least 100 bills trying to restrict voting across the country. Knowing all of this, how do we actually practically fix this problem?
So I think when you look at things like HR 1 and giving people more access to the ballot, and these are federal bills that have already passed the United States House of Representatives, and we got held up in the U.S. Senate, but Georgia has delivered Senators Raphael Warnock and Senator John Ossoff. So I am hopeful that now we can look at how do we make some small changes to HR 1, which includes the Voter Empowerment Act that was championed by John Lewis for session after session in Congress. And then also looking at HR 4, which has now been renamed the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which will get us back to a point for pre-clearance where states like Georgia, who have a history of voter suppression, not just in the 60s and 50s, but as recent as 2018, states like Georgia would have to go through the Department of Justice to get some of these measures that they're trying to enact cleared before they can become law.
Thanks for that. And I know that you also were a part of the public policy team at Planned Parenthood. One of the contentious issues in Georgia, of course, was the heartbeat ban that was struck down. However, a number of other states have similar restrictive laws and bills. We know that the White House said they're committed to codifying Roe v. Wade. Are you planning to be involved in that?
Absolutely. That is one of the things that is of the forefront of what I believe in. And we should not only codify Roe v. Wade, but we should also make sure that we are not we are addressing things like the Hyde Amendment that continue to restrict access. So it's one thing to have a law in the books to say that abortion is legal for everyone in this country, but it's another thing for people to access it. And when you look at things like the Hyde Amendment, what that tells me is that people of means would have access, but people that are living on the margins of our society would not. And so I would take it even a step further and say we need to codify Roe, but we also need to make sure that the Hyde Amendment does not continue to restrict low-income women from the same access that other women have.
And I want to talk about the pandemic, of course, which is probably the biggest issue of our time presently. You had coronavirus yourself, and Georgia is falling in the bottom quarter of states when it comes to vaccinations given. Knowing that, how do you see your state ramping up vaccinations and vaccine distribution?
So vaccinations have definitely been a challenge here. I've been looking at the numbers and tracking them on the Department of Public Health website, where when we look at, and my son has just joined me on the screen. My
Welcome.
apologies, Zinhle.
No worries. Hi, welcome. This is the reality of
He's trying to get me to download a game. See, we got to get our children back to school safely. Carter is home today, and I will talk to you in 1 second, Carter.
Oh, yes, no, it's true. It's a real reality that I think working moms especially are grappling with.
But back to the coronavirus, which is why my baby is home and not in person school. He's in kindergarten, and Wednesdays are asynchronous learning days. And so we do the best that we can. But I suffered from COVID-19 in March of last year. I was one of the first people in the state of Georgia to contract the virus, and I got it at the state legislature. And as we looked at who was contracting COVID-19, it was disproportionately affecting the Black community. And now when we look at the vaccine rollout and who's getting the vaccine, it is not the same people who are disproportionately affected that have access to the vaccine. And so I've been tracking the numbers on the Department of Public Health website, and the numbers have slightly increased in the Black community. Last week, it was around 60% of the vaccines that have been delivered were in the white community, whereas only 5.4% of the vaccines delivered in Georgia have been to Black people. I saw last night that number had risen to about 16%. And there have been some people that have been advocating to get more sites located, co-located with churches helping to do outreach, and with some of our larger facilities on the south side of Atlanta, where we know we have large Black populations, to make sure that we're doing outreach to communities that were hit hardest. So my office is continuing to advocate for that, and we're doing some partnerships and looking to continue to get the word out. I myself got the vaccine 2 weeks ago, and I'm looking forward to my second dose so that I can be fully vaccinated and continue to be a champion for us getting people back to school safely in person so that Carter can go to school, and getting people back to work and our economy back on track.
And it's clear there's so much happening in Georgia, and I'd be remiss, of course, not to acknowledge the late John Lewis. You are in the seat that he held for several decades. I know your husband was close to him, and you knew him for some time. Is there any wisdom he imparted to you before you took this office and began this role?
I think one of the things that I learned from Congressman Lewis by being around him for so long is he always remembered who he was sent to Washington to serve. It didn't matter what was going on. He made time for people. And so I reflect upon that as I'm doing the work, and it's easy to get caught up in what your caucus wants or what someone else wants or some group wants, but just being mindful that I am here to be the voice of the people of Georgia's 5th congressional district, and I intend to elevate them in every conversation that I'm a part of to make sure that they are represented. Congressman Lewis taught us that it is never the wrong time to do the right thing, and we must find a way to get in the way. And if that means me speaking up to make sure that my district has access to COVID vaccines, then I need to find a way to get in the way. If that means me speaking up and being the poster child for why we need to make sure that care is a part of our infrastructure, because my child needs the same care that everyone else needs who is trying to work and make this work during the pandemic, that I'm happy to tell my personal story to elevate the conversations and the lived experience of us people in the 5th district. So I think that is the biggest takeaway. Find a way to get in the way and make sure that you never forget the people that you're in Washington to serve.
Well, thank you so much, Representative Williams, for your time and making your way over here to be with us.
Thank you.
Of course, and thanks to everyone for watching. This has been Know This Live. I'm Zinhle Essamuah.